What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Godell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Welcome to episode 2. Todd, they let us come back.
Well, it's great to be here. There's nothing more fun to talk about than politics, and especially when there's campaigns going on.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, I'm Kirby Godell. I'm a political science professor at the Bush School at Texas A&M University, and I study media and politics, public opinion, anything to do with the political process. I'm excited and interested in it.
And I'm Todd Kent, and I also teach at in the Department of Political Science within the Bush School at Texas A&M, focusing on campaigns and elections, the presidency, strategy. So I think it fits perfect into what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, today we wanted to talk about campaign strategy, but first we're going to start with our quick bites. But before we jump into that, let's just remind the audience that, hey, send us your questions. We want to hear your questions. We want to answer them. We'll answer them as part of the next episode. Send them to insidepoli@tamu.edu, and that's inside Poli, P-O-L-I, sci, S-C-I, at tamu.edu. Let's move on to the quick bites. What did you notice this week, Todd?
Well, there's just so much news coming out, and I think the most interesting thing is that we've got one candidate that spends most of his time in front of a courthouse. And so that makes it difficult for messaging and that type of thing. And so what we were getting from Donald Trump is really the unfairness of the situation becomes his campaign theme. And I don't think that's what they want it to be, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, he seems really restrained. So if you're talking about, how does this affect his campaign and his ability to get out there and do those things that Donald Trump does, being in the courthouse limits him. At the same time, there is a net, I don't want to say it's a net positive because I think it's a net negative probably overall, but there is a positive in that all eyes are on Donald Trump all the time, even though he's in the courthouse in this unfavorable situation, but he's been able to portray it as the system is against me.
Right, and really he likes to portray himself as an outsider candidate going to fight the system, and this kind of lends to that message. What's really interesting, if you look at his numbers, all these indictments and all these court cases haven't really seemed to change much.
Yeah, we used to joke about Ronald Reagan as a Teflon candidate. We talked about Bill Clinton as you just couldn't get anything to stick on Bill Clinton. But Donald Trump seems to be able to absorb more blows than anything we've seen in modern politics anyway, and not fall really far below his base.
I think that's true. And I think what we're seeing is the people that don't like him still don't like him, and the people that like him maybe like him more. So it hasn't changed the numbers. It maybe has solidified them. There
are some people who suggest maybe a conviction would lower his numbers. I don't know that I'm convinced. Are you?
Well, I think, in a minute when we look at kind of how divided the society is along party lines, we see that his own people, probably it's not going to change him a bit. Can this influence the independents or the swing voter? We can talk about that. That'll be very interesting to see if somebody says, well, I can't elect somebody who's been convicted of something.
Yeah, and in a very narrowly divided country, in a very narrowly divided election, everything matters. And that's something that's really important. You can say, it didn't matter a great deal, but 10,000 votes in Michigan, 10,000 votes in Pennsylvania, 10,000 votes in Nevada, all of those, it's going to be a really narrow race and decided by a small number of states.
That's exactly right. And I mean, adding to that, we see kind of polls beginning to include RFK Jr. in there. And we're looking at the first look at whether it's going to affect Joe Biden more or Donald Trump. This NBC poll that was released this week showed a little bit more effect on Donald Trump.
Yeah, one of the fascinating conventional wisdom, I think, if you if you've heard a lot of the talk shows, and when you first hear about RFK Jr. running for office, they almost always say, "Oh, it's going to hurt Biden. The Biden people are very worried. It's going to pull voters for Biden." I think it's partly the name, right? Robert F. Kennedy Jr., famous Democratic family name, but the context really matters, and in the context. RFK Jr. is a protest candidate. He's an outsider. He's a challenger to an incumbent into a status quo, and that's Trump territory.
That's exactly right. He set himself up as almost his own version of going after the deep state or the establishment, talking about the CIA involvement and maybe the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So. He's made himself an outsider, but also it's interesting. Young people today are saying that maybe Joe Biden is too old, and then also Donald Trump is too old, and so is the leading third party candidate or third person in the race. He's younger, and so that may eventually pull some votes away from Biden.
It's also early, so it's important to remind the audience and remind people who are looking at these numbers, we don't really know what's going to happen on Election Day, in part because oftentimes with third-party candidates, as you get closer and closer to the election, people decide they don't want to waste their vote on a candidate who doesn't look like they're going to win. So if he looks like he's not going to win, some of those voters may come back home to Trump or to Biden, and they don't necessarily do it proportionately. Like some of the Trump may get more of his voters back, or Biden may get more of his voters back. But we really won't know what's going on until Election Day. The most famous third-party candidate, of course, in recent years, Ross Perot, he didn't seem to lose a whole lot of his vote and was able to hold on to it, at least in the 1992 election.
That's true. We would expect people to come home to make their vote count. Also, there's a lot of things that he has said over his lifetime when he's not a candidate that will come back to he'll have to make amends for at some point. So that'll be interesting. But my expectation we will see this kind of coming back, and especially if they see how close the race is, they say, I'm not going to waste my vote as a protest vote.
Yeah, and they don't always have a great idea of exactly who Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is right now. So he's an other. He's a I'm not the other two guys. And so I think you're right. I think they will come home. One of the things I've been noticing is neither one of the major candidates really wants to talk a whole lot to the media. They're not talking to journalists very much. They're going into safe places to have conversations that are very comfortable. And this is kind of a funny thing, because if you talk to journalists, a lot of times they're like, they should answer our questions. The public has a right to know, and we're the representative of the public. But you've worked in campaigns, and I've been observing them for quite some time. The campaigns are under no obligation to answer a question.
No, I think what we're seeing is their strategy. Both candidates are trying to shore up their base, make sure their base is intact. That's why you see Donald Trump having his rallies throughout areas to make sure that his base is solid. And we see President Biden going to areas and talking to groups. They're going to maybe shore up any weaknesses he had, especially among young people, unions, other groups, environmental groups. This is they want to control the message. Yeah. And they don't want to get off message. And, with social media today, they can do that more than ever. Yeah. In the past, they had to use what we call the mainstream media to get their message out. Anymore, like today, you go to Joe Biden's website, there's a 3-minute video. That's his campaign message. And in the past, it was unable to do that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really fascinating about the fact that they're not talking to the candidates too is in not doing so, they are controlling their message. They're keeping the message on. If they take the risk and they go and they talk to the reporter, you always hear people say, "Oh, I'm going to just tell everybody. I'll answer anybody's questions." That's a bad strategy, because then that's when you make a mistake. And the way the media work in today's political world is if you make a mistake, it gets broadcast over and over and over again. And gaffes are often as important as any message that a candidate puts out there.
And you know, it's true that the media, they don't make news by asking the easy softball questions. So they really want to ask, whether it be President Biden or Donald Trump, the hard questions, the ones that everybody's thinking about. Those are the ones they don't want to answer in that kind of forum.
Yeah, and if you are the Joe Biden campaign, you don't want him ad-libbing. And if you are the Donald Trump campaign, you don't want him ad-libbing. You want them under control in a setting where they're going to stay on message and they're going to stay super focused in terms of what they're doing. Yeah. Yeah. So just one other thing that I picked up this week that's really fascinating in terms of politics is Congress. Mike Johnson comes through with aid for Ukraine, risking his speakership. It seems like an act of political courage.
Well, it may be. You know, in fact, it was interesting that several Republicans said that Mike Johnson has cost them the leadership of the House, and we'll see if that actually happens or not. It's interesting to me that Republicans have a hard time being in the lead. They have a hard time being the majority party. They're really good at being the minority party and fighting back. We're going to see what's going to happen because there's a lot of factions within the Republican Party that seem to be coming out very strong these days. And so what's interesting to think about is how is this going to affect the broader election? Mm-hmm. You know, is it going to cause people not to turn out because they're just sick of the infighting, and therefore that would hurt Donald Trump or Joe Biden, depending if you're a Democrat? So how is the congressional relations going to affect the presidential race? Also, the Senate is so close and the House is so close that everybody needs as many votes as possible.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things, I think, is a reminder that it's not just about the presidential election. The presidential election matters a lot because of the president is the most powerful person in the world, arguably. But Congress also matters, and the Senate also matters, and the House also matters. And what we're seeing play out here is a very narrowly divided House that can easily swing to the Democratic Party with just a handful of seats, and a Senate that could go to the Republican Party. And potentially you could see one party win the presidency and lose both the House and the Senate, or one party win the presidency and the Senate but lose the House. All sorts of possibilities there, and nothing seems very settled here. Like, I wouldn't want to. I'm not a gambler because I'm a bad gambler. I always lose my bets, but I would not want to put a bet on this election cycle coming up.
A lot of previous research shows that the public does kind of like divided government.
Yep.
They kind of feel like that this is a check and balance for what's going on in the country. So if one president of one party wins, we might see some leadership in the other party in the House or the Senate. So to provide that kind of check on what's going on.
Yeah, but for people who say there's no more bipartisanship, this was a remarkable week because Democrats and Republicans, at least one faction of Republicans, joined together in order to vote together. And it looks very possible that Democrats could keep Mike Johnson in the Speaker's office. That's real. Like, I would not have predicted that a year ago.
Yeah, and that we'll see whether that leads. Is that going to hurt them in the fall, or is that going to help them in the fall? That they showed some bipartisanship. It's very kind of this whole thing is very tenuous because the stakes are very high, and it goes back to, I think what we're going to see is. It goes back to the old adage where you don't need to necessarily have more people that are for you in the election. You have to have more people that are for you that actually get out and vote. Yes. And when we see a tight race in the Senate, and a tight race in the House, and the presidency, we're going to see probably big turnout.
Yeah, so that's it for our appetizers. Let's move on to the main course and let's talk about campaign strategy.
Hey everyone, I'm Jay Sokol, and I host Brazos Matters, conversations about things you might not know, but should if you live in Aggieland. Coolest invention that never made it to market?
Probably the ambicycle. The patient was kind of down on the bottom of the motorcycle, and the rider was up above, the paramedic. They could kind of see each other eye to eye. It just never made. Too many lawyers.
All Brazos Matters episodes are on our website and your favorite podcast platforms. Thanks for listening to Aggieland's Public Radio, KAMU.
This is the PBS app. It's ready for you whenever you want full episodes of your favorites, perhaps a little history, or the real story, shows with heart, or the latest news and docs. even stream your local station live. It's all there waiting for you. So download the PBS app now for everything you love and a whole lot more to explore. Stream anytime, anywhere with the PBS app.
I'm Jennifer Nations, Water Resource Coordinator with the City of College Station and your host for Waterful Wednesday. Each Wednesday morning at 7:42, we'll discuss all things water, how it gets from the ground to your faucet, how to ensure we don't waste it, and more. Grab your coffee, start your Wednesday off right, and join me for Waterful Wednesday each Wednesday morning at 7:42 right here on Aggieland's Public Radio, KAMU FM 90.9.
As part of our deep dive, we're talking about campaign strategy, and one of the most important things I think we have to get off the table right away, Todd, is this idea that one of my concerns with the mainstream media and the way that campaigns are often covered and the way that the conversation goes is we're often caught up in the 24/7. What's going on? How is one candidate responding to whatever event? But when we're talking about campaign strategy, we're talking big picture. We're talking a plan to win the election. And first, it often starts with this question of, is there a plan to win the election? Is there a path to victory for a candidate when they decide to run for office?
Absolutely. Having worked in campaigns for many years, the campaign itself has a plan. They have a plan between now and November to start to build their base and then begin to whittle away at those in the middle and try to reach out and grab enough voters to get to 51%. And it's a long-term plan. It involves lots of kind of micro tactics, I guess you might say, but to come together to hopefully have a winning strategy.
And one of the things you have to do as a successful campaign in the campaign management game is you have to convince voters, especially supporters, especially the hardcore supporters, but also the activists who are volunteers, hey, look, we have a plan. You don't have to overreact to what's going on in the moment. We know how to win this thing. And I think both campaigns certainly have a clear strategy that they're thinking about when we're talking about the presidential election.
When the presidential election, it's very complicated because your strategy has to involve 50 states. Since we have an electoral college system and we add up the numbers to get to 270, there's some states that they're going to win, and sometimes they may not campaign that much there, but then that hurts their own party's candidates in those states, but they're trying to win the House and the Senate. But there is a strategy to get to 270. We have a certain number of toss-up states, as you would say, or swing states, a shrinking number. It seems that way, but those are becoming critical. If you live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, you're going to see a lot of political ads this year.
Yeah, and because what the campaigns have figured out is these are the states that the election is going to be decided by. And as we mentioned earlier, one of the incredible things is given what happened in 2016 and what happened in 2020, we know a small number of votes in those really critical states are going to matter a lot, while lots of votes in some of these other states may not matter at all, except in this sense, if I am the Biden campaign, I might want to get Trump to defend some of his home turf. Or if I'm the Trump campaign, I want to get Biden to defend some of his base voters. So you may make a play at a state that maybe is marginal that you think you can win, but what you want to do is divert their resources so they can put less into those swing states.
That's the goal, is to identify those areas where you think you might have a chance, and you can make your opponent go in there and defend them. It's different. It's getting more and more difficult these days. But we are seeing some shifts. We're seeing states kind of move a little bit Republican, some move a little bit more Democrat. I was really surprised. Nevada, Arizona. Some of these are kind of trending a little bit more Democrat than they did in the past, where states like Pennsylvania seem to be kind of moving Republican, and Wisconsin. So these are states where it gives the candidates a chance to, they're so close to make somebody else spend some money there. And at the end of the day, it comes down to who has enough money to spend to get their message out.
Yeah, so the multiple sort of pieces of the campaign strategy is, where do you put your money? Where do you spend your time? where do you really dedicate your resources? And one of the remarkable things, and this starts at the presidential level, but it goes to the Senate and goes to the House, is in the presidential election, increasingly we're talking about a smaller and smaller number of states that are really important. In the House, we're talking about a smaller number of districts that really matter in terms of determining control of the House of Representatives. And the same thing in the Senate. What we're really talking about is a limited number of races deciding political control.
That's so true. And so it's interesting what you don't see, and because we look at ads, we look at polls, we look at these speeches, is the ground game that's going on in all these states where the campaigns are working and focusing on how do we get our people out to vote, because it's not enough to just have people for you. You have to get them out to vote, especially when we know that it's so close. You look at all the polls, even the NBC poll that was the latest poll that came out. It's so close that it's just it's a little bit of turnout in a precinct here and there can make the difference.
Yeah, and if when we teach this in our courses, we often talk about the classic theory of winning an election, which is based on the idea of the median voter, which is there's someone in the middle, and the campaign that best approximates the median voter wins. And so what you want to do, no matter whether you're the Democrat or the Republican, is especially after the primary season, you want to come to the middle and you want to appeal to the center. But increasingly in our campaigns, both Democrats and Republicans are moving away from that sort of strategy and more towards this base strategy, recognizing that, well, persuasion is hard, mobilization may be easier.
I look back to the Gore-Bush campaign in 2000. Karl Rove, who was the strategist for George W. Bush, said he felt like that they left 4 million evangelical voters at home. And so when in 2004, when he went out to run for re-election, they focused on that area, turned him out, and ended up winning the race. And there was probably other factors, but they turned out way more evangelical voters, and they ended up winning by 4.5 million votes.
Yeah, and that's a great election cycle because one of the neat tactical things that not as much of a strategic thing that the Bush campaign did in 2004, having come so close to potentially losing the 2000 election and being out-mobilized by the Gore campaign, is they really started relying on friends and family to try to mobilize people to get out to vote. But one thing we haven't talked about with strategy is this first question is, do I run? And the second question is, how many votes do I need? And all campaigns start out with an idea, to win this election, I need X number of votes, and it's based on the district and the characteristics of the district and the partisan breakdown and how voters have voted in the past and an estimate of turnout.
You know, a candidate looks at his own party and says, I need to get 95% of my own party, 90 to 95%. The problem is if they only get 87%, that could be detrimental to them, for the Republicans or Democrats. But also they go and break that down among different groups, whether it be racial groups, economic groups, suburban versus urban, these types of things. They know the kind of the target percentages. And when you add it up, you have a winning campaign. So it's strategic. So that means everything you say and everything you do is geared towards, reaching these numbers among those groups.
Yeah, and again, it can be either by persuasion, by trying to figure out, okay, maybe the support of the Democratic candidate in this race is a little weak on this particular issue, so we're going to try to pull away Democratic voters, and we're going to try to pull away this type of Democratic voters, or it can be a pure mobilization strategy, where the goal is, how do we get people fired up for our candidate, make sure they turn out at a really high rate, Beto O'Rourke. He was wrong in terms of being able to win the election, but his campaign strategy was very clear in Texas, especially in that first race against Ted Cruz. If I can get turnout at a certain level, I can win this election. I think what he missed in that election was, guess what? When you mobilize your voters, maybe you also fire up the other side's voters too, and they also respond to your campaign strategy.
That's right. You want to. My students sometimes, we laugh about this in class, is I say, I don't want everybody to vote. I just want the people voting for my candidate to vote, because we always hear this idea that we want everybody to vote. Well, campaigns don't want everybody to vote. They want their voters to vote. So that's why you see a lot of negative ads. And negative ads have a way of suppressing or, maybe keeping a 1 or 2% maybe from voting, then that might be the difference in the election. So it's a numbers game. You said something very interesting where you said that, maybe campaigns are rethinking this, that we're not going after the undecided voter as much as working on our own voters, making sure they're ready to go. It's interesting. Research among those, what we call undecided voters or swing voters, they're typically less partisan. Mm-hmm. They're less informed. They don't like politics. So they're actually the hardest people to reach.
Yes.
If they were reachable, they would have already maybe chosen a side. And so that really, it actually has, I think, become a winning strategy to make sure that you've gotten as much as you can out of your base support. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that's enough, because these other group, you can spend a lot of money for no return. Yeah. Because they're not that interested.
Yeah, and as we become more polarized, it becomes harder and harder. That group gets smaller, right? Because the two camps we've sort of split into camps, and those camps' voters are less likely to jump to the other side because partisan affiliation is so strong. One of the interesting and curious things that we've talked a little bit about is the party division in this country is almost perfectly even, but the way the party vote is spread out through the country means that it's oftentimes Republicans are living around other Republicans and Democrats are living around other Republicans, which goes back to the swing state or the swing district consideration, that there aren't as many places that are really competitive and where the balance between the Democrats and the Republicans are even though across the country it's very even.
If you look at the numbers, I looked at the Gallup party identification question. They ask it every month, and then they look at how many of you, if they said if the election or thinking about politics, do you consider yourself to be a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or something else? And then they take those, the follow-up question for independents and something else, do you lean more towards the Republican or the Democrats? Because they know it's really a two-party race that we have. And what's interesting, it's 44 to 45 right now in March to 2024. 44% Republican, 45% Democrat, with 11%, in this undecided swing voter or whatever you're talking about. That's amazingly close. It is not evenly distributed because you get states like California, New York, but it does give us a glimpse of why this country is so divided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so if part of it is deciding who our voters are and who we're targeting and who we're communicating to and where we're going and where we're spending money and all those important strategic decisions, the other thing that's really important is a broader message. In the first place, that seems to start as having a good reason for why you're running in the first place. And we've seen candidates fail. I mean, most recently, maybe we would say Jeb Bush, where they're asked why are you running for president? And they don't have a great answer. And that seems to be really the first thing. Why are you running for this office? What is it that you are trying to accomplish here?
That's a really interesting question. I think most people would say they run out of a civic duty. They feel like they should. Some need to be elected to office just for personal reasons. So I've heard people say you have to be a narcissist to run for office because that's what it takes. But I think there's a lot of reasons. If you look at the current presidential candidates, Joe Biden tells us he's running to protect us from Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. Yeah. And Donald Trump feels like he's the only one that can solve these problems that we have in government. So there's a lot of different reasons. I think it's obvious both of them have a need, at least a personally felt need to be elected office.
Yeah, sometimes it's very much a personal need, and we know that candidates who score high on if we do a psychological test, we know that the ones who have that need for visibility, who have that need for need that need to be in the public light. They often score highly. A lot of them, though, also run initially because they want to solve an important problem. And for all the cynicism in politics, and I share it 110%, but a lot of our politicians really are out there because they want to make a difference in the world, and they see the opportunity to make a difference in the world, and they see politics as a mechanism for doing that. And the question that they often have to confront first is, can I win this election? So if we move away from the presidential election, we talk about congressional elections, what we're often talking about is someone, or local elections, either saying, can I run and win this race for the House or the Senate or a local city council race? Can I win? And most of them, I think, are motivated because either they want to fix a wrong that they've seen in their society, or they actually want to do something more positive because there's an issue they care deeply about.
It's true, and a lot of work goes into the pre-decision that has to be made. I remember working for a consulting firm, and we were examining governor candidates in the state of Texas, and we had a particular client who hired us to do focus groups all over Texas to determine whether or not this person had an opportunity to win. And it turned out that one of the other candidates won. In fact, she eventually became president of the United States. But it was that because there's, it's a long, hard road to run for governor, for senator, for president, these types of races. And so you have to make sure that you not only do you have the desire, the finances to keep your family going during that time, but also do you have a message and something that people are willing to vote for?
Yeah, and part of the messaging part is a positive, right? Like you want to do something positive for your community, for your country, for your state. Part of it is also thinking about the opponent you're running against, or the opponents. You have to sort of think about the strategic context. How many candidates are? What sort of what sort of base voter are they going to pull off? And so you also have to position yourself relative to the opponents. And one of the reasons I think that a lot of people get frustrated with politics is they say it's too negative. But as a political, watching politics, you have to give voters a reason to vote for you and not to vote for your opponent.
That's right. Well, if you look at the field of political psychology, there's some work being done that shows that unless you're negative and create uncertainty, nobody ever changes their mind.
Yes.
So if you're actually trying to get somebody to change their mind, you have to go negative. They don't change their mind because you have a positive message, and that becomes very hard for the casual, this independent or this swing voter who doesn't like politics anyway. When they just hear negative, they're really more likely not to vote because of that. And so it is something where it makes politics not exciting for a lot of people.
Yeah, strategically, though, if you look at the primary election season, I think one of the things that happened on the Republican side that the challengers to Donald Trump failed to recognize, and I understand strategically why they were doing it. What they wanted to do is they wanted to maintain the MAGA base, but they also didn't give a very compelling reason for why they should be the candidate instead of Donald Trump, because I think they all sort of thought, well, Donald Trump was going to fall by the wayside and we'll be able to step in. And so DeSantis is sort of running as the competent Trump. Nikki Haley's holding her fire until she's the final two, but by then it's way too late. Probably only Chris Christie really figured out that he needed to go after Trump, but he's Chris Christie, and he's already sort of viewed by a lot of the Republican base as not. But it seemed like they failed to really give a narrative for why they were the better candidate, why you should vote for them and not for Donald Trump.
In truth, the Republicans spent ever since 2020. How do we maintain the Trump supporters, which research says about 35% of the Republican Party are diehard Trump supporters? How do we keep them yet not have but yet beat Trump? Nobody figured it out, and I think you're right. They took the wrong strategy. Chris Christie did attack Trump, but he ended up with 1%, I think, in the Republican primary, or 2%. So it wasn't a winning strategy for him. But they needed to keep the base intact, because if they were to have some slippage among Trump supporters, they were going to lose.
Yeah, no. On the Biden side, on the Democratic side, if there is a success of Joe Biden in the primary election, and people don't appreciate this. This is really important in politics, and it's really important in terms of political strategy. Keep your opponents from running in the first place, and so what Joe Biden did that was pretty impressive. Especially given some of his polling numbers and some of the clear issues that were coming up in polling showing some vulnerabilities, is he kept big-name Democrats from challenging him so that he only had a pretty minor challenge during the campaign season. But we've seen that happen in a few elections in the past as well, where the primaries won by deterring opponents, not by beating them in the election.
Right. Well, and really it was quite remarkable, the fact that he was given his age. You think of nothing else just but his age, that it would have a young senator, governor or something jumping in the race would not surprise you. Just saying, it's not. I'm not running against Joe Biden. We need new leadership. And they tried to talk about that, but it's never went anywhere.
Yeah, there was no Barack Obama to step up and say, "I'm the guy who can beat Hillary Clinton and who can win the general election, and I'm the
Right.
youthful, I'm the change candidate." And so and there's good reason for that, because Biden was running as an incumbent president, and I think if you're weighing the cost of running against him, well, if you run against him, you better win, because if you cost the party the 2024 election, you're going to have a hard time coming back in a future election cycle.
And that brings up some interesting, really, things to think about. Is what's the bench look like for a party? Meaning, who's in line? Are they national candidates, or are they kind of a regional candidate, maybe a governor or something like that, where they're good for their state, but they're not going to go beyond that? And then there really is parties, but the problem is that parties are very short term. They're not long-term strategists. And when a person feels like they need to get in, they need to get in right now, instead of maybe thinking 4 years from now might be the place for me.
Now, and when we talk about strategic context, I think Trump benefited from just the opposite. A lot of candidates thought that he could be beat, and so they ended up diluting the anti-Trump vote. And because they were worried about his base, they were worried about being overly critical of him, they ended up going at each other. And instead of saying, "Oh, let's figure out which one of us is the best opponent to Donald Trump, and then maybe we can take him down," instead you have DeSantis and Haley fighting between each other, and neither one of them effectively taking on Donald Trump.
In the last two, in the 2016 election cycle, and certainly this one, the Republicans had so many candidates. Like you said, they diluted the vote. It would have been really interesting to see, what if we'd have started out with 3 candidates,
right?
And then maybe soon went to 2, and then you would have this not Donald Trump candidates or voters within the party coalescing, and would it have been different? I don't know. It seemed to me like Donald Trump had done a good job convincing people that he was the person that could actually make a difference in today's climate.
Yeah. So thinking about the general election, though, and we've been talking a little bit about this between ourselves, but sort of the Joe Biden campaign strategy, it seems to me to, one, just wait it out. Donald Trump will be the opponent, and the way to win the election is to say, "I'm not Donald Trump," and then to use the power of the presidency, to use the power of the goods that you have passed, and go around to various states, like in Arizona, go out and say, "Hey, look, we have this new CHIP Act, and thanks to the act, you're going to get a factory, and we're putting a bunch of investment." And not surprisingly, that investment is in those swing states mostly. Texas did get a good piece of the chip manufacturing money, but for the most part, it's really saying, "Here's why I've been good for you, and look at the rewards that you're going to get because I've been the president," and especially in those swing states again.
That seems to be the Biden message. Even the New York Times reported that he was working on areas that was weak, like with young people, student debt relief, and with environmentalists, rejecting some roads through Alaska wilderness. Sending a message to environmentalists, to unions, calling for tariffs on China. Doing things that will shore up this thing. His other big message is, "I'm here to." His big theme is finish the job, and I'm going to protect democracy. I'm going to protect your freedoms, so that Republicans are going to still, I think he's going to be talking a lot about abortion. He's going to talk a lot about, gay rights, other issues and this. If you look at his 3-minute commercial, that's what he's talking about. Is I'm going to make it so that you have freedom to do what you want to do. Yep. And those Republicans are going to take it away if we let them in charge, which is certainly a message that would help bring back the young people into the fold.
Yeah, and then Donald Trump, for his part, is very much being, I'm not Joe Biden, but remember, back in the good old days when I was president and the economy was booming and before COVID hit, remember you were paying nothing for gas and everything was swell.
Low inflation.
Yeah. And it's a weird, though, strategic context that way because we have two incumbents running. And so the real question is, do you like the last 4 years under Joe Biden, or do you like the years under Donald Trump? And what Donald Trump has been very successful doing, I think, especially for his base, is not pushing all the COVID stuff onto Joe Biden, right? Like it didn't happen under me. Think about 2018, not 2020.
It's interesting if you look at Pew had one of their polls where they looked at age groups and party affiliation, and it's about 47, 48 years old. The majority becomes Republican. Below 48, they're Democrat. And so it looks like a lot of themes you see in the Trump campaign are aimed at this older group, restoring public safety, securing the borders, economic prosperity, and inflation is eating away your Social Security, these type of things. So they're aimed at this group that he feels like it's critical to his success.
Yeah, and so on the Democratic side, the one thing that they haven't been able to really plan for that sort of throws off their game a little bit is the situation with Israel and Gaza. And the question of how to deal with this, because it falls out of their game plan. So we talked about strategy being different to tactics and not over-responding to the 24-hour news cycle. But in this case, it seems like Democrats have to think about this because it seems to be affecting their support, especially among these young people. And the huge advantage for Joe Biden in the 2020 election was young people coming out in droves to support him. And he is still doing better among young people, but the advantage isn't as big. And without that advantage, it's a real problem for his campaign.
Yeah, I mean, who could have predicted the impact that October 7th would have on this election? The Jewish voters historically have been strong supporters of the Democratic Party, and they felt kind of underwhelmed by the Biden administration. And then you have those that are the supporters of the Palestinians feeling like the Biden administration has done too much. So they can't really win in this situation. It's a very difficult position for them to take. And it was interesting how they were coming out so strong for the aid to Israel, and I wonder if there's a mindset we've got to do something to shore this situation up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the Biden administration, both in terms of the pass to 270, if we look at the Electoral College vote, but also in terms of the issues. It's a little trickier for them, it seems like. It's not that they can't win. It's not that they won't win. I'm not trying to make that particular case, but it's just trickier because when you look at the Republican base, Trump can win the Electoral College vote without winning the popular vote. Also, his messaging is way more consistent with most of what is the current Republican base. He lost the Never Trumpers, I think, in 2020. Some of them are coming back a little bit just because they don't like the Biden choice. But on the Democratic side, Biden is confronted with some issues that if he deals effectively sort of with Israel, it can lose younger voters who are more pro-Palestinian. If he comes out stronger on the border, he potentially loses some younger vote. There's some things he can do, but by taking action to really, which might help him more generally, there's a trade-off. There's a constant trade-off for him in terms of voters.
And getting back to where we started with campaign strategy, this is where it becomes so complex. Is what's the right message that helps me hold on to Pennsylvania, or what's the right message that helps me not lose Wisconsin if you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
And realizing that the election, those issues aren't going to affect them nationwide. It's going to affect them in these few states that they have to win, because probably the states that you consider red states or blue states, they're probably not going to shift. It's these few 7 to 10 states that really have the potential to change everything. So their messaging a lot of times is going, and that's why they want regional messages as opposed to big national messages.
Well, and it all comes back to this. I say we are living in a coin toss election period, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine, given how polarized people are around these two candidates. You have strong supporters of Biden who thinks Trump's the worst thing to happen to ever politics. You have strong supporters of Trump who believe the Democrats are the worst thing that ever happened to politics. And it's so narrow that those feelings are so intense, but the election outcome is a coin toss, and it comes down to those critical places, which means campaign strategy means everything. And in 2016, we saw at the end of the campaign, Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin, didn't go to Michigan, didn't shore up her base support, and it cost her dearly. And I'm not saying we're looking at the same thing this election, but we know it's going to be incredibly close, that everything that happens in the election will matter. So that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much for the conversation again, Todd. This is Inside Political Science, and I think that's a wrap.
Well, it's great to be here, and you know, the good thing about it is there's going to be much more to talk about as we move forward.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolicy@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.